I thought it was a rat hanging off Max's tail until it meowed. That was the first thing I blurted out to Dr. Halbrook when I stumbled into his clinic, soaked to the bone, holding my dripping golden retriever in one arm and a squirming ball of orange fuzz in the other. Rain was still pelting the windows like it had a vendetta, and my boots squelched with every step I took into the lobby. But none of that mattered. Not the storm, not the cold, not even the odd looks the receptionist gave me when I barged in without an appointment. All I could focus on was the kitten, the one still shaking in Max's fur. Let me back up a bit. My name's Jacob Morris. I'm a retired firefighter living in a small town in western North Carolina. I spend most of my time fixing things around the house and walking Max, my 12-year-old golden who thinks squirrels are mythical beasts and believes every mailbox might contain a surprise. We've had a simple routine for years, one that usually keeps to itself and avoids surprises. Until this morning. I took Max out for his walk around 6:30 a.m., right before the sky let loose. The clouds were already a bruised purple, heavy, and warning. I remember thinking we had just enough time to get to the park and back. Max had his favorite orange ball, and I had my thermos of coffee. Everything felt normal. Then the heavens opened up. We were already halfway through the park when the rain hit. Not a drizzle, not a polite sprinkle. It was like someone turned on a fire hose. I yelled for Max, who had his nose buried near a bush. He bolted back toward me, tail high, completely unfazed, until I noticed something attached to that very tail. At first, I thought it was a wet leaf, then maybe a clump of mud, then it moved. That's when I said it. "Max, is there a rat on your tail?" Max wagged harder, which only made the creature dangle more precariously. It let out a tiny, broken meow, and I blinked. It wasn't a rat. It was a kitten. A shivering, scrawny kitten, barely big enough to fit in one of my hands. Its tiny claws were tangled in Max's long fur, and it looked terrified. The rain had matted its fur so badly it looked like it had been glued together by wet newspaper. I scooped it off Max's tail, clutching it to my chest. It meowed again, weakly, hoarsely, and then buried its little face into the crook of my arm. Max sniffed it once, gave me a look like, "What now?" and stood perfectly still as we both got drenched. There wasn't a moment to think. I wrapped the kitten in my flannel overshirt and sprinted with Max straight to the truck. The engine wheezed like an old man being asked to dance. But it started. I cranked the heat and turned toward town. The only place I could think of was Halbrook's animal clinic. Dr. Halbrook's been treating Max since he was a floppy-eared pup. The man's got white hair, a slow voice, and the kind of calming presence that could make even a panicked dog sit down and reconsider life. I wasn't sure if the clinic was even open yet, but I didn't care. We needed help. Back in the clinic, I could tell the kitten wasn't in good shape. Dr. Halbrook didn't waste time. He ushered me into the back room and took the little thing from my arms like it was made of glass. Max followed behind us, tail drooping from the weight of water and concern. The examination room was warm, a small relief after the icy rain. Dr. Halbrook flicked on a heat lamp and laid the kitten down on a soft towel. It didn't fight, didn't squirm. It just blinked up at him with eyes way too big for its face. "She's not more than 4 weeks old," he said after a moment. "No tag, no microchip, probably abandoned." He said it like it was just another Tuesday, like tiny, rain-soaked kittens clinging to dog tails happened all the time. I watched as he cleaned her up, checking her temperature and heartbeat. I stood there like some kind of nervous parent, arms crossed, feeling helpless. Max sat beside me, eyes locked on the little ball of fluff. "She's lucky you found her," Dr. Halbrook said. And lucky Max didn't mistake her for a toy. Don't give him too much credit, I muttered. He still thinks the vacuum cleaner is out to get him. The vet smiled at that, but didn't look up. Her back leg's swollen, possibly a sprain, dehydrated too, but nothing we can't manage. I exhaled. He wrapped her in a dry towel and passed her back to me. She was still trembling, but she gave a little sigh when I cradled her. Max stepped closer and sniffed her again, this time more gently. The kitten didn't flinch. She thinks he's her mom or something, I said, watching the way she kept her eyes locked on Max. Imprinting? Dr. Halbrook replied. It happens, especially if she was alone long enough. I frowned. How long do you think she was out there? He shook his head. Hard to say. Long enough to be scared, long enough to cling to the first warm thing that passed by. My heart sank. I've seen some tough stuff in my years as a firefighter. But something about this soaked kitten, this tiny survivor, hit me harder than I expected. Maybe because she wasn't making a fuss. Maybe because she hadn't given up. What now? I asked. Well, he said slowly, she needs rest, fluids, food, and a safe place to recover. Normally we'd try to find a foster or place her with a shelter, but I've got to say, Max let out a low whine, cutting him off. His tail wagged just once, and the kitten's ears flicked. She pressed her nose deeper into my flannel. I think she's already picked her place, Dr. Halbrook finished, smiling. I didn't respond right away. The thought of another pet hadn't crossed my mind in years. After Max, I figured I'd never go through the heartbreak again. But here I was, holding a soaking wet kitten in a vet's office, while my old dog looked on like this was all part of the plan. The kitten gave a tiny snore. I chuckled under my breath. Well, I guess we better think of a name. Dr. Halbrook nodded. You'll want to keep her warm tonight. Maybe let her rest with Max, if he's up for it. He'd probably let her ride his tail again if she asked. And he probably would. That's how it started. A rainy morning, a clingy kitten, and a dog too gentle to shake her off. I didn't know then just how much this little creature would change the rhythm of our lives, or that she was more than just a stray. But something about that storm brought us all together. And it was only the beginning. Max didn't sleep much that night. Neither did I. And judging by the soft mews and tiny scrabbling paws on the blanket beside us, neither did the kitten. After we got home from Dr. Halbrook's clinic, I cleared a spot in the corner of the living room for her. A little cardboard box lined with an old towel, plus one of Max's smaller blankets that he hadn't used in years. I added a dish of water, a few spoonfuls of wet food the vet had given us, and set up a tiny heating pad under one side. Max sniffed the whole setup with a kind of cautious reverence. He gave the kitten a glance, then looked at me as if to say, "So this is happening now?" I gave him a pat on the head and said what I've always said in times of uncertainty. We'll figure it out. That kitten, who still didn't have a name, stumbled around the box, trying to understand her surroundings. Her legs were a little unsteady, especially the swollen one, but she didn't cry or fuss. She'd walk, fall, then walk again. Max lay down nearby and watched without blinking. Eventually, she tried climbing out of the box, and when she couldn't, she just flopped onto her side and stared at Max's tail. It was the same tail she'd clung to during the storm. I half expected her to make another leap for it, but she didn't. Instead, she yawned, rolled closer to the edge of the box, and fell asleep facing him. By midnight, she'd woken up twice, once for water, once to meow. A soft, sleepy protest, like she wanted reassurance that we were still there. Each time, Max would lift his head, shuffle closer, and lie back down again. And each time, she'd calm instantly. At some point, I dozed off on the couch. When I woke up at dawn, Max was asleep right next to the box, his nose practically inside it, and the kitten was curled up beside his snout, tucked beneath his ear like it was her new roof. I got up slowly, trying not to disturb them. They didn't move. Coffee in hand, I stood there and just watched them for a long while. I'd never seen Max so calm with another animal, not even other dogs. He was always friendly, sure, but protective? This was new. And the kitten? It was like she thought he was her whole world. I called Dr. Halbrook later that morning and gave him an update. He said to keep her resting, monitor her leg, and keep her warm. I asked about giving her a bath. He laughed and told me unless I wanted to lose a finger, maybe give it another day or two. That afternoon, we went to the pet store. I hadn't been there in years. It was the same little place off Main Street, run by a cheerful woman named Patty, who had more stories than items on the shelves. When she saw Max, her face lit up. "Well, look who's still wagging," she said, giving him a gentle pat. "What brings you in today?" I lifted the carrier with the kitten tucked inside. She was nestled in a towel, just her ears and wide eyes poking out. "Got ourselves a new house guest," I said. Patty leaned in. "Oh my stars, she looks like a little peach. What happened to her?" Long story involving a rainstorm, Max's tail, and a surprise vet visit. Patty laughed in that way that made you feel like your story had just won an award. She helped me pick out kitten food, a shallow litter box, some tiny toys, and a soft bed that looked more like a cinnamon roll than anything functional. Max nosed through the aisles and stopped in front of the display of tennis balls, which I took as his gentle protest that not everything should be about the kitten. I grabbed him a new ball. When we got home, I set everything up and watched her try to figure out the litter box. Max kept a respectful distance, observing like an older sibling who'd seen it all before. The kitten eventually got the hang of it, then proceeded to pounce on the toy mouse like it had said something rude to her. By dinner, she was purring. It was faint, and it came in little bursts, like she was still figuring out how to do it. But when she curled up next to Max again, this time resting her head right on his paw, she started up again. I sat on the couch, watching them, bowl of soup in my hands, and felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, exactly, but something close. I still hadn't picked a name. I tried a few out loud that evening. "Misty?" No reaction. "Pumpkin?" She blinked slowly. "Daisy?" She sneezed. Max looked unimpressed. Then I said, "Scout." The kitten stirred. Her ears perked. She opened her eyes and gave the softest little chirp. Max tilted his head. I said it again. "Scout." She stood, unsteady but determined, and climbed up Max's leg until she reached his shoulder. Then she curled up and closed her eyes. Max didn't move a muscle. "Well," I said. "That's settled." The days that followed were a blur of feeding, cleaning, coaxing, and watching. Scout learned fast. She followed Max like a shadow, and he let her. She watched him drink, then tried it herself. He'd sit at the back door and stare outside, and she'd plop beside him, mimicking his pose. At one point, she tried barking. The noise that came out was something between a hiccup and a meow. Max licked her ear. I took Scout back to Dr. Halbrook after a few days. Her leg was better, still tender, but she was using it more confidently. He was impressed. said she was healing faster than expected. "She's got a strong will," he said, lifting her gently from the carrier. "She's got a strong tail to hang on to, too," I joked. Max stood beside me like a sentinel. Back home, we started to fall into a new rhythm. Walks with Max, now, included a brief stop at the window, where Scout would press her face to the glass until we returned. Then she'd climb all over him like she was inspecting him for damage. Max let her. One night, a thunderstorm rolled through again. Not as bad as the first one, but enough to rattle the windows. Scout hid under the couch. Max followed and lay beside her, calm and quiet. After a few minutes, she came back out, tail high. By the end of the week, I couldn't imagine the house without her. But I wasn't the only one watching this transformation. On the second Sunday since the storm, my neighbor, Harold, stopped by. He's a widower in his 70s with a penchant for overwatering his lawn and a soft spot for Max. He hadn't seen Scout yet. When I opened the door, Scout immediately darted behind Max's legs. "What in the world is that?" Harold said, squinting. "Her name's Scout." "She yours?" "She's Max's," I said. Harold chuckled. "Figures. That dog always was a sucker for strays." He stayed for coffee, and Scout watched from the edge of the couch. When Max settled near my feet, she climbed onto his back and perched there like a tiny lioness on a golden hill. "She's got spirit," Harold said, nodding. "More than I expected." He looked at me. "You ever think about fostering? There's a place up in Hickory that always needs help." I shook my head. "I'm not exactly set up for that. Didn't stop you from rescuing a kitten in a thunderstorm." That night I lay in bed and thought about it. About the timing, the quiet, the way the house had felt before Scout arrived. Not lonely, exactly. Just quieter. Still. Like a book that had too many blank pages. And now? Now there were paw prints on the windowsill, food crumbs under the fridge, and a kitten who chased dust particles like they owed her rent. I wasn't sure what came next, but I had the strange feeling we were just getting started. The first time Scout climbed the curtains, I was pouring my morning coffee and heard the unmistakable sound of something tearing. Not a small rip either. A dramatic, end-of-the-world type tear. I turned around, half awake, and saw her frozen near the top of the living room drapes, clinging to the fabric like a terrified squirrel who suddenly realized she couldn't fly. Max was seated beneath her, looking up with a mix of curiosity and concern. He tilted his head, barked once, more of a conversational bark than a warning, and wagged his tail. The movement was too much. The curtain gave in. Scout tumbled down, landed on Max's back, then bounced off onto the carpet like she meant to do it all along. She trotted away, perfectly pleased with herself. Max gave me a look that I could only describe as exhausted. That was how our mornings began now. Scout had grown bolder with each passing day. Where she used to sleep tucked under Max's belly, she now spread out across the couch like royalty. Where she used to cower when she heard the vacuum cleaner, she now chased it with full-body pounces. And Max, to his credit, handled it all with endless patience. He let her bat at his ears. He shared his bed. He even started leaving a few kibbles in his bowl at mealtimes, which I'd never seen him do in 12 years. Something was changing in him too. He had more energy, longer walks, brighter eyes. Even his tail, always a reliable barometer of mood, had a little more bounce to it lately. I didn't question it. I just let the days unfold. A week later, I took them both on a drive. Max always loved the truck. He'd sit in the passenger seat, head out the window, tongue flapping in the wind like a flag of happiness. Scout had never been in the truck before. I put her in a soft-sided carrier and belted it into the back seat. She meowed for the first 10 minutes, then dozed off in a little pile of sunshine coming through the window. We drove out to the overlook outside town, a place Max and I used to hike to before his hips started slowing him down. I parked and let him out first. He sniffed the grass like it was an old friend. Then I opened the carrier. Scout blinked at the bright light, then stepped cautiously onto the seat. She glanced at Max, then leapt from the truck like it was nothing. The grass came up past her belly, and she froze, unsure. Max turned around and nudged her forward with his nose. Together, they wandered through the tall grass. Scout stayed close, weaving between Max's legs like she thought she was invisible. I followed them up the small hill, watching her chase butterflies and paw at fallen leaves. At one point, she tried to pounce on Max's tail again. He let her, then gently rolled onto his side, trapping her under a furry arm. She squeaked, then purred. We stayed there for over an hour. When we got home, I pulled into the driveway and saw a note on the door. It was from Mrs. Granger, the widow who lived 2 houses down. She'd been walking her grandson's dog that morning and spotted a kitten under the bushes near her shed. The kitten had run away before she could catch it. She thought maybe, given my new reputation as the cat guy, I might be able to help. Scout was asleep on Max's back when I read the note. I scratched my chin, looked at the clock, and figured we had time. We walked down to Mrs. Granger's just before dusk. Her yard was full of flowers and hummingbird feeders, and the scent of honeysuckle drifted across the fence. She met us at the gate, holding a saucer of milk and a flashlight. "I haven't seen it again," she said, voice low, "but it was tiny, real skinny, looked scared." Max sniffed around immediately, nose to the ground. Scout was tucked under my arm in a sling I'd fashioned from an old towel. She peeked out, eyes wide. 10 minutes in, Max started barking. Not the loud kind, just little woofs. He pawed at the bushes, then stepped back. A pair of glowing eyes stared out from the branches. I crouched low. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay." The kitten didn't move. Scout meowed. Just once, soft, clear. The eyes blinked. Then, to my astonishment, the kitten crept forward, slowly, belly dragging in the dirt. It stopped inches from Max's paws, then glanced up at Scout. Scout chirped again. The kitten climbed onto Max's foot. I stared. Max stood perfectly still, even when the little one began kneading his fur like it was testing for comfort. Mrs. Granger gasped. "Well, I'll be..." I picked the new kitten up gently. It was smaller than Scout had been, with a torn ear and a scar over one eye. But it wasn't feral, just scared. I turned to Mrs. Granger. "You mind if I take it to the vet?" "Of course not. Poor thing's better off with you." We drove straight to Dr. Halbrook's. He was about to close for the evening, but stayed late to check the kitten over. Male, 5 weeks old. No chip. Malnourished, but nothing serious. No sign of illness. When he handed the kitten back to me, Scout reached out and smacked him on the head. Not hard, just enough to say, "Welcome to the family." I didn't have a second name ready. I tried Ranger. No reaction. "Toby?" Nothing. Then I said, "Finn." He licked my thumb. At home, Max settled on his blanket like usual. Scout curled beside him. Finn paused for a moment, sniffed the air, then climbed right on top of Max's head and passed out. That night, with both kittens purring like engines beside him, Max slept harder than I'd seen in months. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. Scout had found the paper towel roll. Finn had discovered the inside of a shoe. Max had decided to supervise from the kitchen, but judging by the trail of kibble leading to the hallway, he hadn't been very strict. I made coffee, watched them chase each other around the table, and realized I'd stopped waiting for the house to go quiet again. This was the new normal. Later that week, I was fixing the porch railing when I heard a knock on the fence. Patty from the pet store was there, holding a flyer. "Jacob, you still thinking about what Harold said?" she asked. "About fostering?" She nodded. "The shelter's got a litter that was abandoned behind the feed store. They're running out of room. I remembered what Harold told me about you and the dog and the kitten. Figured maybe you'd want to help." I looked at Max, who was sunbathing with Scout sprawled across his belly and Finn chewing on his tail. "Let me talk to the team," I said. Patty laughed. "You've got a regular staff now, huh?" I scratched Max behind the ears. Best crew I've ever worked with. That evening, I sat on the back porch with Max while the kittens wrestled over a ball of yarn. I remembered a time when I thought Max was slowing down, when I'd thought maybe our best adventures were behind us. Now, with two tiny shadows running circles around him and the porch echoing with laughter again, I wasn't so sure. We were just getting started. It took Finn exactly 3 days to realize he could climb the bookshelf. I was in the kitchen trying to fix the leaky faucet, gritting my teeth and muttering at the wrench, when I heard the distinct sound of books falling in rapid succession. I sprinted into the living room, half expecting to see the house collapsed or the couch on fire. Instead, I found Finn hanging off the second shelf by one paw, eyes wide with thrill and panic, and 3 paperbacks on the floor. Scout was seated below him, tail flicking, as if she had just given him a full tutorial and was now watching the results of her coaching. Max, ever patient, remained curled on the rug with his head on his paws, observing it all like a grandfather who had accepted the chaos of youth. I sighed, picked Finn up, and set the books back in place. That moment, funny as it was, reminded me I needed to kitten-proof the rest of the house if we were going to foster the new litter from the shelter. Patty had called again that morning. They were getting overwhelmed. 6 kittens, barely a month old, found abandoned in a cardboard box near the county fairgrounds. The shelter was full. They were hoping I might take 2 or 3. Maybe just until adoption day. I said yes before I even thought it through. And so, the next afternoon, the house that had once been quiet and slow found itself preparing for reinforcements. I spent the evening moving cords out of reach, taping drawers shut, and stacking anything fragile high up where no curious paws could reach. Max followed me from room to room, tail swishing lazily, while Scout and Finn interpreted my preparations as a personal challenge. At one point, I caught Scout dragging a sock into the living room with the proud strut of a cat who thought she had hunted it in the wild. Finn followed behind her, chewing the hem. By the time the doorbell rang the next morning, I was ready. Patty stepped in with a plastic crate and a big smile. "I brought the smallest ones," she said. "They're still wobbly on their feet, but healthy. You're gonna love them." I knelt as she opened the carrier. 3 kittens blinked up at me, one gray with white paws, one all black with huge ears, one calico with the loudest meow I'd ever heard. Scout and Finn crept forward, wide-eyed. Max got up slowly, came over, and lay down near the crate, like a sentry guarding a treasure. I gently lifted each kitten out and placed them one by one on a blanket. They stumbled and swayed and sneezed. Scout immediately tried to wrestle the calico, who yowled in protest and waddled straight into Max's fur. He didn't flinch. Finn stared at the new arrivals like he was trying to figure out where he ranked now. I sat back and watched the introductions unfold. Within the hour, it was clear who was in charge. Not me, not Max, not even Scout. The Calico, who I dubbed Pepper, had taken ownership of the food dish, the scratching post, and the sunny spot by the window. The gray one, who I called Moose, was shy but affectionate, always cuddling with Max or curling up in the folds of my jacket. The black one, who I named Echo, had a squeaky little meow and a habit of leaping before looking. The house shifted again. Meals became group events. Nap time resembled a furry mosaic. Max had to sleep on the floor because the couch was now a full-time cat condo. At first I worried he might be overwhelmed, but he adjusted with the same quiet grace he had when Scout first arrived. He understood the rhythm of kittens, when to nudge them gently, when to let them climb, and when to simply lie still and provide warmth. Dr. Halbrook stopped by the following week to check on everyone. He crouched on the floor with a stethoscope and gave each kitten a look over. "You're turning into quite the operation here," he said, scratching behind Echo's ear. "I didn't plan on any of this," I said. "Best things never are." He checked Max last, kneeling beside him and murmuring something low as he felt around his joints. "He's doing better than I'd expect for his age," he said. "The company's good for him. Keeps him moving, keeps him young." Max wagged once. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat on the porch steps with a mug of chamomile and Max at my side. The air was cool, the stars sharp and clear. I thought about the house before, about the quiet, the routine, the empty afternoons. And I thought about now, the squeaking paws, the overturned plant pot, the nap pile that consumed half the couch. Life had found its way in again. A few days later, the county shelter held its adoption fair. I packed up the kittens, Pepper, Moose, and Echo, into their carrier. Scout and Finn meowed at the door as I loaded them into the truck. Max climbed in beside me, head out the window, wind flattening his ears. I could tell he knew what we were doing, and maybe, like me, he wasn't sure how he felt about it. At the fair, the kittens drew a crowd immediately. Patty had made little signs with their names and personalities. Families came and went. Children squealed. One by one, people fell in love. Pepper went first, to a couple with a daughter who held her like a treasure. Moose found a home with an older gentleman who just wanted a quiet friend. Echo, after somersaulting out of her enclosure, was adopted by a family with 3 boys and a yard full of adventure. I said goodbye to each one, smiling, but I felt the ache as I watched them go. Max pressed his head against my knee. Scout and Finn curled together in the truck on the ride home, silent, as if they understood something had changed. The house felt a little too big that night, a little quieter again. I didn't say much, just sat with Max by the window while Scout and Finn played with the same old toy mouse. But even they seemed to be moving slower, until Max barked. Just once. Sharp. Joyful. And Scout darted down the hall with Finn chasing close behind. I smiled. Because I realized something. We'd do it again. Because this chaos, this noise, this life, it was ours now. 2 weeks after the adoption fair, I found myself standing in the kitchen with a dripping garden hose, a soggy bath towel wrapped around my shoulders, and a half-washed Scout clinging to the top of the refrigerator. Finn was under the table, paws outstretched, staring at the chaos like it was the best show he'd ever seen. Max, noble as ever, stood in the doorway, tail swaying, wearing a look that screamed, "You did this to yourself." The goal had been simple: give Scout her first real bath. What followed could have qualified as a natural disaster. I'd tried every trick in the book. Warm water, gentle voice, slow movements, even a tiny rubber duck for emotional support. Scout had none of it. 1 second she was in the sink, the next she was airborne. And then I was on the floor trying to salvage my dignity. She hadn't even gotten fully wet. I looked up at her perched above the fridge, damp and furious, her eyes narrowed like I'd committed a personal betrayal. I sighed, dropped the hose into the sink, and reached for a second towel. "Well," I muttered, "maybe we try again next month." Max barked once, maybe a laugh, maybe just sympathy. I tossed the towel over my shoulder and looked at Finn, who was now batting a stray sponge under the table. "You're next, little guy." He froze, then vanished behind the couch. I never meant to become a full-time cat wrangler, but somewhere between that first rainstorm and this disastrous bath day, things had shifted. I wasn't just a guy with a dog anymore. I was the human in a household full of fur, claws, and increasingly complicated feeding schedules. Still, I loved it. That weekend, we visited the local farmer's market. It was a sunny Saturday, one of those spring mornings where everything felt like a postcard. I loaded Max into the truck, and Scout and Finn went into the carrier, which I lined with a blanket that smelled like Max. The market was bustling, people selling jars of honey, bushels of fresh carrots, baked bread, and homemade soap. Max was a minor celebrity. Everyone knew him. He accepted head pats like a true gentleman and posed for photos with toddlers. But it was the kittens who stole the show. I set their carrier on a shaded bench and opened the top. Scout was the first to peek out, ears twitching, eyes scanning. Finn followed close behind, cautious but curious. Before long, we had a small crowd gathered. Kids squealed, adults cooed. Someone offered to knit Scout a hat. It wasn't long before a woman from the local newspaper approached. She wore a bright floral dress and carried a camera around her neck. "You're the one with the dog who rescued the kitten, right?" she asked. I blinked. "I guess you could say that." She smiled. "We've been looking for a feel-good story. Would you mind if I wrote about them?" I shrugged. "Sure, as long as Max gets top billing." She took a few photos, one of Max sitting tall with Scout perched on his back, one of Finn chasing a leaf across the pavement, one of me holding both kittens, while Max leaned into my side. She asked for their names, how they came to me, what it was like fostering. I gave her the story, all of it. The rain, the tail, the vet visit, the curtain climbing and the couch naps, how Max had changed since they arrived, how I had changed too. She left with a grin and promised to send me a copy when it was published. That night, I grilled chicken on the back patio while the kittens darted in and out of the sliding door, trying to catch the smoke. Max sat beside me, his gaze steady and peaceful. I passed him a small slice of grilled zucchini, and he took it with his usual gentleness. When the sun went down, the yard glowed in that soft orange way that makes everything look like memory. Scout curled in Max's tail. Finn rolled onto his back and sneezed. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and breathed in the moment. Then came the knock. It was Patty. She looked a little frazzled, holding her phone in one hand and a soft-sided carrier in the other. Her car was still running in the driveway. "Jacob," she said, "I hate to do this to you, but we've got an emergency." I stood. "What's wrong?" "Someone dropped off a mother cat and 3 kittens behind the feed store again. But the mother's not doing well. She's too weak to nurse. We've got no space left at the shelter." She looked past me, into the house where Scout and Finn were now frozen in the hallway. I figured if anyone could handle this. I didn't hesitate. "Bring them in." Max rose and stepped beside me as Patty carried the carrier inside. She set it down gently, unzipped the top, and there they were, 3 tiny kittens, barely bigger than mice, curled into one another. Their mother lay against the side, breathing shallowly. Patty knelt beside her. "We've been feeding her with a syringe. She's stable for now, but she needs quiet and safety." I nodded. "We'll take it from here." She looked up. "You sure?" I looked at Max, at Scout, at Finn. "Yeah," I said. "We've got a system." That night was quiet, but not in the empty way, more like a room full of whispered stories. I set up a warm space in the laundry room, lined with towels and heating pads. The kittens stirred occasionally, letting out soft peeps. Their mother, who I started calling Maple, rested with her head tucked into the corner. Scout peeked in once, blinked slowly, and walked away without fuss. Finn, curious as always, stuck his whole face in before sneezing and sprinting down the hall. Max lay in the doorway, watching it all. Over the next few days, we took turns feeding Maple. Syringe first, then small dishes of warm food. The kittens grew stronger, eyes opened, legs steadied. Maple started grooming them again. And Max stayed close, always nearby. Like he understood this family needed an anchor. One morning, I found Scout curled next to Maple. They weren't touching, but they were breathing in sync. Finn was watching the new kittens pounce each other from a cardboard box like a tiny coach planning strategy. And Max was asleep, with one paw draped over an empty food bowl. When the article came out, it was front page Sunday edition. The headline read, "Rainstorm, Rescue, and a Golden Heart. How a Dog's Tale Changed 5 Lives." There was a picture of Max with Scout on his back. Another of Finn playing tug with a shoelace. One of me holding the new arrivals. And at the end, a quote I didn't even remember saying. "Sometimes the smallest lives fill the biggest spaces." The mailman asked for a copy. Patty framed one for the pet store. Dr. Halbrook stopped by to sign it. But Max? Max just wagged his tail and waited for dinner, like none of it mattered. To him, it probably didn't. He didn't need the spotlight. He just needed the sound of tiny feet, the warmth of a nap pile, and the porch swing creaking softly in the wind. And all of that, we already had. When the first hummingbird of summer zipped past the porch swing, Finn leapt so high he nearly knocked over the flower pot. Scout followed close behind, ears flattened, eyes wide, tail twitching like a metronome set to chaos. Max, now used to sudden bursts of feline chaos, didn't even lift his head from the sun-warmed deck. It was early June, and the house had taken on a whole new rhythm. The 3 kittens we'd taken in, Maple's babies, were now racing around the house like a living hurricane, their paws barely touching the floor. Their mother, stronger by the day, had claimed the armchair near the window as her throne. She sat there like a queen, watching her kids wreak havoc while ignoring their every cry for attention. I'd started naming them, though I wasn't sure how permanent they'd be. The smallest one, pure white except for a gray smudge on his nose, I called Bean. The second, a rambunctious orange ball of mischief, was Rascal. The third, with fur so dark it shimmered blue in the light, was Wren. They moved as a unit. Where one went, the others followed. They'd nap in a pile under the coffee table, climb the curtain one after the other, and ambush Max from behind the laundry basket with synchronized attacks. And Max, bless him, kept playing along. Every morning, I found at least one kitten tucked against his belly, sometimes all three. Maple would join in now and then, curling at his back. Scout and Finn remained the elder siblings, slightly aloof, often smug, but secretly proud. I could tell by the way Scout tolerated Rascal batting her tail, or how Finn allowed Bean to chase him halfway across the house before doubling back for a gentle bop. The house was louder now. Messier, hairier. But there was something about that noise, those thumps, mews, skids, and purrs, that made me feel more settled than I ever did in the years before. One Thursday morning, while I was trimming the hedges out front, I heard a tiny voice yell, "Kittens!" A little girl from down the street had stopped at the edge of the yard. She couldn't have been more than 7, wearing rain boots and a backpack covered in glitter. I turned off the trimmers. "You like kittens?" She nodded fast. "I saw one in your window yesterday. It was orange." "That's Rascal. He's living up to the name." She stepped closer to the gate, eyes wide. "Can I pet him?" "Well, they're a little fast, but I think Max might come say hello." I called out, and sure enough, Max came padding to the door, Scout and Finn trotting behind him like bodyguards. Rascal bounded out the moment the screen opened. The girl squealed. Rascal paused dramatically, then ran full speed toward her. She giggled as he circled her boots. Max followed and gave her a gentle nudge with his nose. Her mother caught up a moment later, waving from the sidewalk. "Sorry, we've seen them from the window. She's obsessed." "No harm done," I said. "They like visitors." By the following week, we'd had 6 more visits. Word spread faster than I expected. People started stopping by. Neighbors, friends, kids with bike helmets, retirees with cameras. Someone even left a bag of toys and a note that said, "For the Max crew." I didn't mind. It felt like the house was becoming part of something bigger. That same weekend, Patty from the pet store called with an idea. "We're thinking about doing a weekly cuddle corner at the shop," she said. "Just a few adoptable kittens, and maybe Max if he's up for it. You've got a gift, Jacob. These animals feel safe with you." I looked around at the chaos. Scout on the windowsill, Finn halfway inside a paper bag, Bean snoring beside a tipped-over lamp, and thought about it. "I'll talk to Max," I said. He agreed with a tail wag and a yawn. So we started small. Saturday mornings, just a few hours. Max would lie on a big blanket near the front of the shop, while a few kittens clambered around. Scout and Finn supervised from a cat tree. People came in waves, petting, smiling, asking questions. Some adopted. Some didn't. But everyone left happier. Maple even made an appearance once, sat on a shelf like she owned the place, didn't move until it was time to go. The local news station did a segment. A reporter filmed Max playing with the kittens and asked me how it all started. "With a rainstorm," I said. "And a kitten who mistook a tail for a lifeline." I got a letter the next week from a school across town. A class had seen the segment and wrote thank you notes. Crayon drawings of Max and the kittens filled my mailbox. One note read, "Thank you for saving all the small furries. You are a hero." I taped it on the fridge. Life rolled forward. Summer deepened. The backyard grew into a playground of shadows and sunbeams. I built a small enclosed cat run off the porch, lined with platforms, toys, and soft turf. Scout loved the top shelf. Finn preferred the tunnel. The new kittens took turns wrestling inside a hanging hammock that wobbled dangerously. Maple, finally confident enough to trust her surroundings, began sleeping in my bed. Max still chose the rug by the door, where he could hear everything. And me? I woke up each morning with fur on my socks, toys under the couch, and a dozen small reasons to smile. Dr. Halbrook came by for a house call near the end of June. He checked Max's joints, listened to the kitten's hearts, and gave Scout a treat that she took with great suspicion. "You've built something good here," he said, watching Finn leap across 2 ottomans like a professional stunt double. "Feels like it built itself." He looked at Max, now snoozing with Wren curled in the crook of his neck. Funny how animals find their way to where they're needed. That night, I sat on the porch again with Max beside me. Fireflies blinked in the distance. The air was warm and humming with frogs. Inside, I could hear Maple giving a low meow, probably calling her kids to bed. Scout bounded up to the window and meowed back. Finn darted through the cat run and skidded to a halt, tail high. And Max? He exhaled deeply, head on my foot. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. The house wasn't full. It was alive. And it still had room to grow. It started with a single sneeze. Just one. Finn had been curled in my sock drawer, half asleep on a pile of mismatched cotton, when he let out a tiny, squeaky achoo. I chuckled, patted his head, and didn't think much of it. Kittens sneeze all the time, but then Scout sneezed too. Twice. Loudly enough that she startled herself and fell off the couch. That got Max's attention. He lifted his head, ears twitching, and gave me the same look he used to give when the smoke alarm went off in the kitchen. Concerned, but not panicked yet. Within a day, Rascal was sniffling. Wren's eyes were watering. Maple was hiding behind the dryer, unusually silent. Even Max, who never seemed fazed by anything, was following me around a little closer than normal, like he could sense something was off. That's when I called Dr. Halbrook. By the time he arrived, the whole house sounded like a feline infirmary. There were sniffles, coughs, sneezes, and more than a few droopy tails. The kittens, once wild streaks of energy, were suddenly sluggish and sleepy, curling in tight piles and napping longer than usual. Dr. Halbrook moved carefully through the living room, checking each little body one by one. He listened to their lungs, checked their eyes, gently felt their bellies. He even checked Max, who passed with flying colors, though he refused to leave my side the entire time. "It's a respiratory virus," Halbrook finally said, scribbling notes into his clipboard. "Nothing dangerous as long as we treat it early and keep them warm. It's been going around shelters and pet stores this month. Could have come in on someone's clothes, or even blown in through the screen door." I nodded slowly, absorbing it. "They're going to need medicine," he continued. "Twice a day for about 10 days. Keep their area extra clean. Monitor for fevers or trouble eating." As he spoke, Rascal tried to climb the ottoman and immediately gave up halfway, flopping over like a deflated balloon. Halbrook looked at me. "You okay with that?" "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. He smiled. I figured. That night, I turned the guest room into the recovery suite. Clean blankets, low lighting, heating pad tucked under one corner. Max sat in the hallway outside, watching through the cracked door like a nurse on duty. Scout and Finn, the original duo, chose to stay with the sick kittens, rather than sleep in their usual spots. Even Maple allowed herself to be swaddled in an old hoodie of mine and held still while I cleaned her eyes. Every morning started the same. I boiled water for coffee, opened the window to let in some fresh air, then lined up 7 small bowls of soft food with crushed medication hidden inside. Then came the doses, tiny syringes filled with pink and yellow liquids that made every kitten squirm. Finn hated it the most. Scout accepted hers like she was tolerating a bad spa treatment. The house took on a new rhythm. Slower. Quieter. I read books out loud while sitting on the floor, letting the sound of my voice fill the spaces where paws used to race. Max never let me out of his sight. He didn't bark, didn't nudge. He just watched. Always watching. By day 5, something shifted. Wren was the first to bounce back. She leapt from the windowsill onto the couch and did a full somersault trying to chase her tail. Scout, energized by the moment, joined in. Rascal managed a weak meow and pawed at Finn's ear. Maple started eating again. I sat on the floor and exhaled. We were getting through it. I called Patty with an update. She cried on the phone, said she'd been worried sick and had heard another foster home had lost 2 kittens that same week. We stayed on the line for an hour, talking about everything from flea baths to pumpkin supplements. I was exhausted, but it was the kind of tired that comes from giving everything you have to something that matters. On day 7, I woke up to a purring pile of fluff at my feet. Every kitten was back in motion, tangled together on the quilt like they'd never been sick at all. Scout blinked at me from the top of the dresser, her expression clear. "We're good now. Feed us." I laughed. "Yes, ma'am." The worst was over, but it left a mark. I started checking them more often, watching their breathing, listening for anything strange. I washed my hands so often my knuckles dried out. I wasn't scared anymore, just aware. I'd learned how fast things could change, and I'd learned how fast they could get better. By the following weekend, we were back at Cuddle Corner. Max sat on his usual blanket. The kittens swarmed the visitors. One little boy lay down on the floor so Wren could crawl onto his chest. A woman in a sun hat spent 15 minutes just watching Rascal sleep in her arms. Finn found his way to an elderly man's lap and promptly fell asleep. The man didn't move for the rest of the hour. Patty pulled me aside. "We've had adoption requests for all 3 of the new ones." I nodded slowly. "That's good." "You don't sound happy." I paused. "I am. It's just, after the last couple weeks, they feel even more like mine." Patty looked at Max, who was licking Rascal's head. "He's going to miss them." I swallowed hard. "We all will." That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea while Max curled at my feet. Scout and Finn lay in the doorway, just watching me. Inside, the kittens snoozed in their usual tangle, soft breathing filling the house. The stars were clear. The air smelled like honeysuckle. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen. I was just there. In it. Surrounded by life I hadn't asked for but couldn't live without. And in the quiet, with Max beside me and healing all around, I realized something else. This wasn't just a house with animals. This was a home with purpose, and it was only just beginning to understand what that meant. The first heat wave of July hit harder than expected. By noon, the porch thermometers were flirting with triple digits, and the air outside hung like wet wool. I kept every window shut, blinds down, and ceiling fans whirring. Even the kittens, usually wild from dawn until dusk, had melted into furry puddles across the floor tiles. Max lay by the fridge, which I'd given up trying to keep him away from. He'd discovered that the cool air leaking near the bottom corner of the door was the perfect place to rest his chin. I tried not to trip over him as I fetched a pitcher of ice water. Scout had claimed the bathroom sink. Finn was inside the empty tub, twitching in his sleep, paws paddling as if chasing something in a dream. Wren, Rascal, and Bean were flopped on a damp towel under the fan in the living room, looking collectively betrayed by the sun. Maple snoozed belly up in her favorite armchair, a soft breeze from the nearby box fan lifting her whiskers. I had frozen peas pressed to my neck, and a faint hope that the power wouldn't cut out. Midway through the afternoon, I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. I peeked through the blinds and saw a familiar van with the county shelter logo painted on the side. Patty stepped out, fanning herself with a folder as she walked up the path. She didn't knock, just opened the screen door and called, "Permission to melt inside?" "Granted," I said, handing her a glass of water before she even reached the kitchen. She gulped half of it in one go, then exhaled loudly. "It's like soup out there." Max wagged his tail once without lifting his head. "Okay," she said, catching her breath. "I need a favor. A real one." I leaned on the counter. "That sounds serious." She opened the folder and laid out a few papers. "We've got a bonded pair, older kittens, maybe 5 or 6 months, brought in last night. Sweet personalities, but shy. One's deaf, we think. The other's his shadow. We don't have room, Jacob. And I know you're already juggling a circus here, but..." I didn't even let her finish. "Bring them in." Patty blinked. "Really? You think Max will object?" As if on cue, Max rolled onto his side with a groan. "I'll go get them," she said. 10 minutes later, I stood at the doorway as Patty carried in a large, soft-sided carrier. Inside were 2 nearly identical tabby kittens, huddled close, their bodies pressed so tightly together you could barely tell where one ended and the other began. "This one," Patty said, pointing to the slightly larger of the 2, "is Butter. He's the hearing one. And this," she gestured to the smaller one with a blue collar, "is Rai. He's the deaf one. Butter never leaves his side." I crouched and unzipped the carrier slowly. They didn't bolt, just blinked up at me, wary but calm. Butter stepped out first, then turned back and nudged Rai forward. Scout appeared silently from the hallway and stared at the new arrivals with her usual skeptical intensity. Finn followed behind, more curious than cautious. The rest of the kittens peeked around the corner in a fuzzy wave. Rai's ears flicked. He glanced around, then followed Butter's lead into the living room. Max lifted his head just as Butter reached him. The kitten stopped, sniffed once, and then, remarkably, climbed straight onto Max's outstretched paw. Rai followed. Max didn't move, just gave me a slow blink. "They're good kids," Patty said, watching them settle in. "Scared, but gentle. Just like the rest of us, then." Patty stayed for dinner. We sat on the floor with sandwiches and lemonade while the cats explored the room. Rai stayed close to Butter, but his confidence grew by the minute. I learned quickly that he responded well to vibrations. A stomp on the floor, a clap, a sharp tap on the wall, he'd look up, ears twitching, as if tuning in through his paws. By the end of the night, Butter was in the cat hammock, and Rai was curled up beside Max's nose. Max snored. Softly. I set up a quiet corner in the laundry room for them. Extra soft blankets, a second litter box, their own food bowls. But by morning, they were both back in the living room, noses tucked under Max's tail. Integration. Complete. Life adjusted again. The house expanded, not in size, but in energy. I started keeping a small, dry erase board on the fridge with feeding times and medication reminders. Scout occasionally erased it with her tail. Finn once drew a line through breakfast and circled second breakfast with his paw print in peanut butter. Max seemed to thrive in the chaos. He moved a little slower now, sure, but there was a steadiness in him that pulled the whole group together. The kittens flocked to him like sunflowers turning toward light. I noticed something special about Rai. When Butter wasn't looking, Rai would sometimes venture a few feet away, watching everything with a laser-sharp focus. He learned to follow shadows, the flick of tails, the gusts of air from moving paws. He adapted with a kind of elegance that made me pause. One afternoon, I found him in the hallway, sitting perfectly still, watching Scout chase a bug. He didn't move, just watched. And when the bug flew near, he pounced without hesitation, landing squarely on it. Scout stared at him, then walked away in what I can only describe as grudging respect. Later that week, I had visitors. My niece and her twin boys came by, all wide eyes and loud footsteps. The kittens scattered, except Rai. He sat on the armrest, blinking at the boys as they approached. "Why doesn't he run?" one of them asked. "He listens with his feet," I said. "And you're being gentle." They sat down slowly, and Rai climbed onto their lap, like it was the most natural thing in the world. After they left, I found Max asleep in the kitchen, Rai and Butter on either side of his neck. It was the most peaceful I'd seen him in weeks. That night, I updated the Cuddle Corner sign to include Butter and Rai. Patty said she'd print new flyers. But deep down, I had a feeling those two weren't going anywhere. The house was full again, not just with noise or fur, but with story. Each animal had a chapter. Scout, the rain kitten. Finn, the tail clinger. Maple, the matriarch. Rascal, Bean, and Wren, the hurricane trio. Butter and Rai, the quiet brothers. And Max, the anchor who held it all together. Summer was far from over. And somehow, I knew the best pages hadn't even been written yet. It was just after the 4th of July, when the thunderstorm rolled in without warning. Not a soft summer drizzle, but one of those heavy, growling downpours that seemed to split the sky open in flashes. I had just finished rinsing the last of the dishes when the first boom hit. Every light in the house flickered. Finn, who had been snoozing on the windowsill, launched himself halfway across the room. Scout dashed under the couch. Rascal knocked over a plant in his panic, dirt spraying in an arc across the tile. Max didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly got up, stretched with an exaggerated yawn, and padded toward the hallway. I followed him instinctively, grabbing a flashlight just in case. He stopped outside the laundry room, where Butter and Rai had been napping. Another crack of thunder rumbled. Butter jumped up, tense, eyes wide. Rai hadn't moved, but his body was rigid. Max walked in and lowered himself beside them. He didn't do anything else. He just lay there, calm and solid. Rai crept toward him first, crawling halfway up his shoulder before curling under his ear. Butter followed, trembling slightly but relaxing as soon as his brother sighed. I watched the three of them for a long moment, my hand still holding the flashlight, not even turned on. The storm lasted well into the night. I spent most of it on the floor with the flashlight turned to its lowest setting, surrounded by nervous cats. Maple sat on top of the dryer, overseeing everything like a seasoned general. Scout eventually climbed into my lap. Wren insisted on burrowing into my hoodie, and Finn alternated between pacing and hiding in the sink, Somewhere around midnight, I dozed off with Max's chin on my foot and 3 kittens purring into my sides. The next morning, everything smelled like wet grass and damp fur. The air was clearer, cooler. The world outside glistened with raindrops, and for the first time in days, the heat had broken. The kittens emerged slowly. Rascal was first, brave and energetic as ever. Bean followed, then Wren. Butter and Rye came out together, as always. Scout flicked her tail once and immediately reclaimed her perch on the windowsill like nothing had happened. Max went to the porch and stared at the soaked yard. I followed him out, sipping my coffee as the wind carried the earthy scent of fresh rain. Max sat in the corner, eyes scanning the fence line. That's when I saw it. A flash of white fur by the oak tree. At first, I thought I imagined it, but Max stood and gave a single, alert bark. I stepped down into the yard and moved slowly toward the tree, Max at my side. Tucked between the roots, barely visible beneath the damp leaves, was a kitten. Smaller than any we had, bone-thin, soaked to the skin, and shivering. No collar, no sound, just wide eyes and a body frozen in fear. I dropped to a crouch. "Hey there, little one." The kitten didn't move. Max stayed still, only his ears twitching. I reached out, speaking in the calmest voice I could. "You're okay. I've got you." When I touched its side, it flinched but didn't run. I lifted it gently and tucked it against my chest. The fur was matted, cold, and buzzing faintly with tremors. But the kitten didn't protest. It just collapsed into the warmth. Inside, I wrapped the newcomer in a dry towel and brought it to the bathroom sink. The others circled like curious storm chasers. Scout peered in from the door, Finn tiptoed onto the toilet lid, and Maple settled by the shower stall like a disinterested chaperone. I washed the kitten gently, warmed it with a heating pad, and whispered nothing in particular. Just words. Soft things. Promises that might have meant nothing and everything at once. After a small bit of food and water, the kitten slept. Curled into a ball, tiny chest rising and falling slowly. I called Patty. "Another one?" she said, almost laughing. "Jacob, you're going to need a second house." "Already looking for one with more windows," I joked. She offered to come by and check the kitten the next day, bring supplies, maybe even help brainstorm a name. I told her to bring cookies, too. The rest of the day passed in a kind of hush. The new kitten, who I started calling Clover, barely moved except to breathe. The others stayed surprisingly quiet, as if they understood this one needed space. Max never left the hallway. That night, just before I turned off the lights, Clover lifted their head and gave one soft meow. It was the smallest sound in the world, but it filled the room like thunder. By morning, Clover had taken a few shaky steps. Finn brought her a toy mouse and promptly sat on it when she didn't react. Scout left a single piece of kibble next to her blanket, then walked away without looking back. Clover's recovery was slower than the others, but steady. Each day brought a little more life, a few more purrs, a slightly stronger tail twitch. Max kept his silent vigil, always close, but never too close. When Patty arrived with supplies, she took one look and smiled. "This one's going to be special." "Aren't they all?" "Sure," she said, "but this one, she picked you, found you. In the rain." I looked at Max. He wagged once. The summer continued like that. One new rhythm folded into another. We built a second cat run on the other side of the house, dubbed it the South Wing. I rearranged the living room to make space for more beds, shelves, and sleeping nooks. The dry erase board on the fridge grew crowded, and through it all, Max moved slower, but never less certain. He took his time rising, climbed stairs with care. But when one of the kittens cried, he was there before I was. He always was. I caught him one afternoon curled around Clover, who had grown stronger but still liked to sleep close. He'd tucked his paw gently around her back, nose nestled near her ear. I didn't take a photo, didn't want to break the moment. Instead, I just watched. Then I whispered, "Thank you, old friend." He opened one eye, looked at me, and closed it again. That night, the stars came out early, bold and bright. I stood on the porch while the house behind me breathed with life. Fur against blankets, soft paws on hardwood, wind through the screen. And somewhere in the kitchen, a kitten sneezed. I smiled. We were still growing. The leaves started turning just after the first cold snap in September. One morning, I stepped out onto the porch and found the grass covered in a blanket of gold and red, the air sharp enough to make me pull my sleeves down. Max was already outside, sitting like a statue at the edge of the yard, his nose pointed at the wind. Behind me, the house stirred with movement. Tiny paw taps, the clink of bowls, soft meows echoing down the hall. Scout was the first to leap into the leaf pile that morning. She disappeared into it completely, only to pop back up with a leaf in her mouth like it was the best prize in the world. Finn darted in after her, kicking leaves into the air. The kittens followed like a swarm of giggling children, Wren and Rascal trying to wrestle each other mid-jump. Clover walked tentatively through the mess, stopping to sniff each leaf like they were clues in some mystery she was solving. Butter and Rye sat together on the porch, just watching. Rye had grown taller but still kept close to his brother, always aware, always scanning. They didn't move until Max did. When he stepped into the leaves, both of them trotted after him. That afternoon, I brewed cider on the stove and baked a small batch of pumpkin scones from an old recipe I hadn't touched in years. The smell filled the house, rich and warm. Maple sat at the table like she expected a seat. I gave her a bite. She gave me a look like she approved. I'd been watching Max more closely these days. His pace had slowed noticeably. He no longer sprang up when the doorbell rang or chased the squirrels along the fence. But he was still there, still himself. Still the quiet compass of the house. When Patty stopped by later that week, she noticed it too. She knelt beside him and scratched his ears. "You've been working overtime, old man," she said gently. "Time to rest a little." He wagged once and leaned into her hand. That weekend, we hosted a small adoption event in the backyard. It wasn't anything official, just a few friends and families Patty knew from the shelter. We set up chairs and brought out snacks. The kittens, all of them, explored freely, sniffing new shoes and curling into strangers' laps. Scout maintained her supervisor role from the top of the picnic table. Finn played greeter, weaving through everyone like he was the mayor. Butter and Rye sat together on the garden bench, heads tilted in tandem whenever someone approached. Clover stayed close to Max, who lay under the shade of the oak tree, his head resting on a folded blanket. By the end of the day, 4 kittens had new families lined up. I packed their bags carefully, blankets that smelled like home, a favorite toy, a little note with feeding tips and quirks. I hugged each family, offered my number, and promised I was always a call away. That night, I walked back into the house and stood in the quiet. It wasn't empty, not at all, but it was a little different. Calmer, like a room after laughter settles. Max followed me in. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, then made his way to the middle of the living room, where Clover waited. She touched her nose to his and curled beside him. We sat there for a while. No TV, no music, just breath and presence. Over the next few days, the air turned colder. I pulled the space heaters from the closet and fluffed the winter blankets. The kittens who remained spent more time indoors, lounging in sunbeams or burrowing into laundry baskets. Scout claimed the warmest spot by the radiator. Finn tried to steal it every chance he got. Max didn't move as fast anymore, but he moved with purpose. If a kitten cried, he was there. If someone knocked, he showed up at the door. When I sat on the porch with my coffee, he came to lean against me. Not every time, but enough to say, "I'm still here." One evening, I found a photo in an old box. It was Max as a pup, ears too big for his head, sitting beside my boots on the back porch. That had been 12 years ago, before the cats, before the house had grown fur and rhythm and the heartbeat of many. I held the photo as I looked across the room. Max lay on his side, Clover tucked behind his legs. Butter and Rye sprawled nearby. Scout flicked her tail in sleep. Finn snored lightly from the laundry basket. A home doesn't just hold life, it changes with it, learns to breathe alongside every creature that enters. I'd watched mine do exactly that. When the first frost came, I set up beds near the fireplace. Scout and Finn curled together, Maple stretched out long and content. The younger kittens nestled close, sleepy and warm. Max took the spot closest to the fire. He rested his head on my foot. I felt him sigh. In the morning, I woke to the sound of birds and the quiet shuffle of paws. I found Clover at the window, watching the sky lighten. She turned when I stepped in, blinked once, and looked down at the hearth. Max was still there, still and peaceful. The sun crept in slowly. I sat beside him, put my hand on his head, whispered words I didn't plan but meant all the same. The house was quiet that day, but not heavy. The kittens moved gently. Scout sat close. Finn lay at my side. Even Butter and Rye, always moving as a unit, seemed to pause longer, blink slower. That afternoon, I took Max's blanket and laid it across the back porch, his favorite view. I sat there with my coffee, the same way I had 100 times before. The leaves drifted down like soft applause. The others joined me, one by one. Clover first, then Finn, then the rest. Even Maple. We sat together. All of us. Wrapped in the same wind that once carried a shivering kitten to our doorstep, and though the porch had never felt more full, the silence between us made room for everything Max had given. The rhythm of the house didn't stop. It changed. It softened. And it kept going, because that's what love does. It grows, it carries, and it never really leaves.